I have a research interest as well as a clinical interest in patients who develop immune-related adverse events from immunotherapy for cancer, and specifically for lung cancer, which is the tumor type and the patients I look after. So we know that the pneumonitis that occurs in patients with lung cancer tends to be more severe, and that this is a more common immune-related adverse event in this cancer type compared to other cancer types. So I have extensive experience of diagnosing and treating patients who have developed pneumonitis from anti-PD-1 or anti-PD-L1 agents, either as standard of care or in the context of clinical trials. I think some of the observations we have made in terms of looking after these patients is that unlike bleomycin, where there is a characteristic involvement of the bases, there is no characteristic radiographic feature that indicates pneumonitis. So if there is a radiographic abnormality, that may span a number of appearances and could involve a more organizing pneumonia type appearance, which for all intents and purposes can sometimes look like metastasis. It can involve the sort of bilateral interstitium and look more like a classic pneumonitis. Patients can develop ground glass opacities. It can take on a hypersensitivity appearance. It can take on a reticulonodular appearance. And then you can also have patients who have a mixture of all of these appearances and end up having pneumonitis. So I think that that's a very important take-home message for providers who are looking after patients who develop this type of toxicity, to be aware of that variety. The second issue, I think, is discerning between pneumonitis and other competing differential diagnoses, such as pneumonia, progression of cancer within the lungs, and some rare infections such as fungal pneumonias. For many of these complications, particularly lung cancer patients, the images can all look very similar and the clinical presentations can all look very similar. And for that reason, in those who are symptomatic, I usually try to advocate for trying to do an extensive workup, including an infectious evaluation that incorporates a serum galactomannan and other tests to rule out fungal infection. And in some cases, I would even advocate for doing a bronchoscopy to fully evaluate for rare infections and to make sure that there is no histologic proof of progressive disease. And in order to do this, I think, and I would recommend for many providers, to try to set up close partnerships with organ specialists such as pulmonologists, so that if you encounter a difficult case, you have someone with expertise in your team who can help you disentangle this question and manage these patients appropriately. The last thing that I think is a challenge and is an area that we have looked at quite extensively in pneumonitis is how we can innovate in terms of treatment. So we know that thankfully the majority of patients who get pneumonitis respond well to corticosteroids. And from immunotherapy, the standard dose would be 1 milligram per kilogram per day of prednisone or the equivalent in patients with grade 2 pneumonitis, which is symptomatic pneumonitis. However, there is a subset of patients in whom corticosteroids will not benefit them. And an area that it really is in need of further study is to understand what immunosuppressive agent may be the next go-to strategy after steroids. And that is something that we are actively looking at in an ECOG trial that is due to open shortly.